So once more, I'm referring to the prestigious Buddhist review, New York Times. Well, we're supposed to be connected to daily life in Zen, so it's a good thing. Once again, it's David Brooks, who is my inspiration. Literally, because last Friday he writes, "What is inspiration?" So I think some of what he says here can apply very well to many elements of our experience in life. I hope it's certainly to our Zen experience. And we'll be examining two of the more famous koans that I've commented on before, but looking at it specifically from this point of view of understanding inspiration. And in fact, the first paragraph refers to one of the great debates in Zen. I mean, not directly, but in its basic content. He says in a new book, the author downplays the importance of native-born genius, even in people like Mozart, he says, and emphasizes the importance of deliberate practice, painstaking exercise to perfect some skill. And he says anybody who has observed excellence knows that this is basically right. Dogged work is the prerequisite of success. Yet, there are some moments after much steady work when the mind and spirit take flight. We call these moments of inspiration. You've heard it said, 85% perspiration, 15% inspiration, that kind of thing. They kind of steal upon you, longed for and unexpected. So one of the big debates, across the centuries in Zen, especially with the Rinzai and Soto school, Soto schools, you've got to, do practice, sit, for a long time, really apply yourself, and whereas, Rinzai will say, well, it's sudden, it can happen like that, And as you see, the two kind of do go together. There's a sense that you practice, and sooner or later something sudden will happen. So, as usual with debates like this, I'm not sure if I got the Soto or Rinzai correct there, but as usual with debates like this, kind of like grace and free will in Christian debate, it's a false dichotomy in the end. No matter how much preparation goes into it, and normally some is required, the inspiration, the ultimate experience of Satori, of enlightenment, is very sudden. So, to show how these different elements interact, I'm going to refer to two of the koans in the Mamonkan. As I said, there are some famous ones that we've looked at before. One is the story of Ryutan and Tokusan, and this is one where the candle is blown out. You might remember that, number 28. And various elements in the story as we go along illustrate some of these very points that we made. For example, Tokusan, was all into the Diamond Sutra. So into, traditional wisdom, as practiced and as understood. And he was really against all these people who are saying special transmission outside the scriptures, not relying on letters. This mind as it is Buddha. He was against all this stuff because it seemed to say that without applied traditional practice with the scriptures, you can't have enlightenment. Kind of like evangelicals who say without referring to the Bible, you can't have really. Well, it's the same kind of attitude. So he's kind of like St. Paul trying to rope people in and bring them back to the high priest. Trying to combat this. But as he's going on his way. And this is Shibayama's commentary. He's one of the best, if not the best. And he meets an old woman, and this always happens. This smart guy comes along, and an old woman makes a fool of him, because of course women are more spiritual. So he says, "Venerable monk, if you answer my question," she's selling a snack there called tenjin. I'll treat you. If you answer my question, but if not, you can't have it here. So he's called Diamond Shoe because he's on to the Diamond Sutra. He says, "Well, you may ask me any question." So the old woman says, "Okay, in the Diamond Sutra," so she goes, right to where he's comfortable. It's written that the past mind is unattainable, the present mind is unattainable, and the future mind is unattainable. So if you have just said that you would light up your mind, which mind are you going to light up? In other words, what mind is going to be enlightened? And by the way, he points out that the Chinese characters for tenjin also mean light up the mind. the snack that they were going to have means to light up the mind. You can imagine that, right? A snack would be called like a pick-me-up, like light up your mind. Anyway, if that's the way it works, but it's interesting.
Tiramisu.
Right, exactly. Pick-me-up, tiramisu. So, an old Zen master, now an old Zen master, Shibayama says, what a pity. Diamond Shu could have had an opportunity of awakening right there. He could have had that inspiration right there, but he didn't. Okay, didn't come. Wasn't the moment, whatever. But he must have felt something deep down because, as he says, because he then asked, well, where can I find the Zen master around here? So he goes to Ryutan. He's directed to Ryutan, whose name means a dragon in the lake, and says, I don't see any dragon or lake here. And Ryutan says, you have arrived at Ryutan in person. And he says, Diamond Shu could have been enlightened right then. Could have had a moment, in person, right here and now. But he didn't. It wasn't the inspiration. Okay. And then we come to the actual koan, in which Ryutan and Tokusan, Diamond Shu, are discussing, as you may recall, discussing the Diamond Sutra, discussing Zen well into the night. And then it's time for him to leave the tent or the house, wherever he is. And Ryutan lights a candle for him. You might remember the story. And holds it out. And after he says it's pitch dark outside, he says his mind is like a dark abyss. So he got the candle and handed it to him. And just the moment when Tokusan took it, he blew it out. Ryutan blew out Tokusan's candle. So, who was inspired? Ryutan was inspired. He had an inspired moment that this guy needs to have his candle blown out to get it. All this Diamond Sutra stuff you can blabber about all night long and not get anywhere. Like a theology professor. So the whole universe was in sheer darkness again. And all of a sudden, Tokusan's relativistic self was dispersed like a barrel unhooped. He said psychologically he was in a touch-and-go situation. So he was ready, and Ryutan realized that at that moment, he was right for. He had been primed through all of these experiences to maybe get it. And that's what happened. The great inner conversion, which has been described in Zen, the world has collapsed and the Iron Mountain has crumbled. And that's what happened. So he was himself enlightened at that moment. When the light went out, the light went on. That was a moment of that's illumination. That's enlightenment. That's the unexpected, transformative moment of inspiration that he kind of can prepare for, but nothing can finally prepare you for the thing that just comes like that and you can't control it. There's going to be a couple of things you're going to see in a minute in the article. So the next day, Ryutan says to the monks, someday in the future, he will certainly be a great leader, which he was. But he said, that's kind of saying, okay, but you have to keep developing, keep growing in your enlightenment. It's not just once and for all. These things build on each other. And we'll come back to that point. And then, at the end of the koan, Tokusan, with irresistible joy and gratitude are always the result, took out all his notes and records he had made on the Diamond Sutra and said, however thoroughly you may study and master profound philosophy, compared to the depth of experiential truth, it will be like placing a single strand of hair in the great sky. However exhaustively you may learn essential theories in the world, compared to the absoluteness of the untransmittable reality, it will be like throwing a drop of water into a deep ravine. So he burned up all his notes and records. Like Thomas Aquinas, said it was all straw, everything he ever wrote at the very end, because he had the experience. And then Shibayama at the very end says, of course he didn't have to burn the sutras. They can still be of help to people, he said, which is true. But he was making a point, and he was so thrilled with the actual experience that he said, well, the very thing he had been militating against and preaching against and working against, it's special transmission outside the scriptures. Just blew out a candle. That was it. That's the moment. And the other one I want to do is the sixth patriarch, Wei Neng, the 23rd, thinking neither good nor evil. And again, all sorts of elements in this story illustrate this as he goes along. Here's someone who is just uneducated, so not following, the study program and the social structure and all of that. He was just listening to the Diamond Sutra, so it can be used for good. It's one of the reasons I chose these two, because you have Diamond Sutra in both of them. He heard the chanting of the passage as he was going along selling firewood, just an ordinary guy. No mind, no abode, and here works the mind. So something happened. You got an initial spark just from hearing it. And then he went to seek a master and joined as, like a kitchen help in a monastery. But he's the teacher, the head monk, the abbot saw that this guy had after a little conversation, that he had some potential. And then you remember the contest he had, the contest in writing a poem to see who would be the next head monk. You might recall that. So the first monk, the kind of the leader among the disciples, writes, is he inspired? Here we get artistic inspiration and Zen inspiration kind of coinciding or not. So he writes, the body is the tree of Bodhi, the mind is like the stand of a bright mirror, and moment by moment wipe the mirror carefully, never let dust collect on it. So your mind is like the pure mirror. You don't want any dust collecting on it, any thoughts, any distractions. Okay, so that, he thought it was a good poem, but it was not quite penetrating yet. So then he had someone write for him. He couldn't write, he was illiterate. That's how much he studied the scriptures. He had, Bodhi is not originally a tree, nor has the bright mirror a stand. Originally there is nothing. So where can any dust collect? In other words, there's no mind at all. There's nothing, there's no thing there to collect dust. So he's the one that was chosen. He was inspired, both artistically and in a Zen way. But then the koan goes on to say that one of the monks who was a former soldier and general, and he was really indignant that all this had happened, that this nobody got to be the transmission. He chases him, because the monk flees at the advice of the abbot, and we meet up on a mountaintop. And you might recall the story. He places the bowl and the transmission objects on a rock there, and tells him, "Go ahead, take them. It doesn't matter." And he can't lift them. But listen to this. This is how Shibayama interprets it. It's not like being able to pull Excalibur out of the rock. He says, in his emotional agitation at that point, he was worked up to some psychological point here, and what had happened, he was chasing, meeting him, everything. He could not lift them, hesitating and trembling. He's on the verge of something, obviously, and it's affecting his whole being here. He simply stood there, petrified. His ego-centered and enraged self was at once completely smashed. So this was the most important moment in his whole life, he says. Scarcely any commentators who make mention of it, he says. They don't realize just how crucial this was, how he was just so ready for this. His whole being was there. He was changed to one of those who quotes hunger and thirst after righteousness. So he quotes the Beatitudes. Shibayama does right here. So the teaching was, when you think neither good or evil, when you're beyond all duality, what is the true self? What is your true self at this very moment? And he got it. That was the inspiration. The teacher was inspired to make that action and to make that statement, but then especially Myo himself, he woke up then. At this extreme moment, he could be awakened to his true self, dripping with sweat, with tears of gratitude. It's always the result. And notice the sweat. The sweat is here not the result of study. The sweat is just his whole being was bursting. The sweat almost, the sweat of inspiration. So perspiration here is inspiration. Or the immediate preparation for it, or the result of it. That's very interesting. And so that's what he realized. And then he says, Shibayama ends by saying, so this is a question for us too. Where is your true self at this moment? He's given this commentary in the hope that his disciples will put all their strength into breaking through this barrier. So there we are, back to perspiration. You've got to apply yourself, and maybe the moment will happen. Then it can come at any time, So some of the things he says about inspiration here. These moments feel transcendent, uncontrollable, irresistible. There's a thrilling feeling of elevation, a burst of energy, an awareness of enlarged possibilities. Absolutely, that's exactly what enlightenment is about. Being capable of more than you thought. It's not like being manic. It's so much more than that. It's not a psychological state so much as a spiritual state, in that sense. The inspired person is driven intrinsically by the work itself, not by some other gain. Obviously, it's the whole reality which opens up your whole self. It's no ulterior motive or no subordinate motive. Inspiration is not earned. Your investment of time and effort prepares you for inspiration, but inspiration is a gift. It goes beyond anything you could have deserved. Absolutely. Experience it that way. Not something you could control. You've lost your agency. And he says the Greeks called it the muses, the artistic inspiration. Believers might say it's God or the Holy Spirit. Okay? Something bursting from the unconscious, another way of saying it. Those are not mutually exclusive, those different views, by the way. Inspiration does not happen to autonomous individuals. Of course, it means inspiration is a breath into. But he says it's in function of possibility in others. So there you see. Remember, Ryutan said of Tokusan, in the future he'll be teaching others. It's always got a larger intention than just enlightening an individual. It's to make a bodhisattva out of him, to enlighten the whole world. And that's true of any kind of deep inspiration, artistic or otherwise, scientific or otherwise. We're talking about that. It's intrusive, transcendent, transformative, evanescent too. I like to think of if you know the experience of Eckhart Tolle, who got this huge enlightenment when he was 29, when he was suicidal. There would seem to be like no preparation for that. It was a pure gift. And yet you can say that his darkness, that abyss that Shibayama was referring to in the case of Myo there, that abyss that was opening up, the darkness was the preparation. So that kind of emptiness is itself a type of preparation. Can be, anyway. And the final point, he says, the memory of that momentary blaze can become a kind of reproach to the fireless life in which you find yourself most of the time. Okay, this is important. This is where we get into that, different ever higher levels of enlightenment and inspiration that kind of build on one another. So it's true, you kind of sink back into where you were, but it's never the same where you were as before. I like Abraham Maslow's description of psychic life, especially psychic spiritual life, as reaching plateaus, and then you have a peak experience. If you're familiar with this thought, you have a peak experience that could be called satori or inspiration. You have a peak experience which raises you up, but then you kind of live at a higher plateau. It's a consistent level. You don't just fall back to where you were. You've been raised to a different level where you consistently live, and that is what happens. As you're more and more enlightened, you don't fall back to where you were, but you kind of live at a higher plateau. The way I experienced this was, you get to a certain level, kind of consciousness, more or less habitual. But I found that, when I go on sesshin, throughout the 2000s, going on sesshin every year, I really had the experience that it was like finding out, concentrating over a number of days, so that you're kind of, really using like a jackhammer or a pick. You're really, really going down deeper in that experience. So we're not talking about going higher, but deeper here. And then you achieve a new level that becomes habitual. So because you've devoted that intense time of practice, you can, or at least you can, it's still a gift. You can reach a level, we call it higher or deeper, that's a different habitual way of living and being conscious. So I think that's an important realization. So it fits into Maslow's idea that you reach a different plateau, and you can consistently live there, more or less consistently live there until you go higher or deeper again, whichever image you want to use. Is I think how inspiration works, certainly in Zen. And then finally he says, people who go through this are overawed by something large and mysterious, vastness, or God or enlightenment or Buddha nature. They are both humbled and self-confident. Now that's really key. You're so humbled because you know this is so much bigger than little you, who don't even really exist anyway. And you're very confident because, wow, you've got the universe, you've got the Buddha nature in you, it's right there. So it's not megalomaniac because you're humble at the same time, but it's not fearful little you because now you're the Buddha, or Christ. So it's a fascinating mixture of humility and self-confidence. One without the other is pretty dangerous. Surrendering, but also powerful. When people are inspired, they're willing to take a daring lark to something truly great. They're brave enough to embrace the craggy fierceness of the truth. I like that. Very Zen expression. Craggy fierceness of the truth. And to try to express it in some new way. So he sums up. Yes, hard work is really important for achievement. You've got to do your practice. You've got to make the preparation most of the time. But life is more mysterious than just that. So you can toil away and do all the preparation you want, but unless there's the bolt from the blue, something bigger taking hold of you, some inspiration from the spirit or the muses or the unconscious or whatever you want to call it, you won't know what life is, because life is so mysterious and wonderful. So, any comments?
Before Mass today, it was funny, I was looking at Matthew, I think it was 13, and there's a